Remember me, Cowboy? I'm the Apache girl you saved years ago. I've returned to marry you. Luke McAllister was known throughout the small desert town of Tombstone for his courage and skill as a cowboy. He was tall and strong, with sun-roughened skin and eyes that seemed to always watch the horizon. People said he could ride any horse, shoot with perfect aim, and always lend a hand when someone was in trouble. But despite his reputation, Luke was a quiet man. He preferred the company of the open desert and the soft whinny of his horses to the crowded saloons and noisy town gatherings. His life followed a steady rhythm of work on the ranch, tending cattle, fixing fences, and helping neighbors when needed. Still, he felt a part of him was missing, though he could not put into words what it was. One scorching afternoon, with the sun burning fiercely overhead, Luke decided to take his horse, Dusty, and ride beyond the usual trails. He needed to check the fences near the edge of the desert, where the land was rough and wild. The wind blew hot against his face as he guided Dusty over rocky terrain, the familiar scent of dry sage and desert flowers filling his senses. Luke liked these solitary rides. They made him feel alive, connected to the earth, and free from the troubles of everyday life. As he crested a small hill, he noticed a sudden change in the sky. Dark clouds were forming far in the distance, strange for this time of year. The wind began to shift, carrying a cold, heavy scent that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Luke slowed Dusty down, squinting at the horizon. The desert could change quickly, and storms like this could be dangerous. But what caught his attention more than the storm was a small figure near a dry creek bed, a girl, perhaps 12 or 13, trying to cross the rocky stream. Luke felt a jolt of concern. The creek bed was swollen with recent rains, and the water now churned dangerously. The girl wore simple clothes, not enough to protect her from the cold water or the sharp rocks. She struggled, slipping once, and Luke's heart pounded as he realized she could be swept away at any moment. Without hesitation, he urged Dusty forward. "Hold on, girl." "I'm coming," he shouted, hoping she could understand him. Luke reached the creek just as a huge wave of water knocked her off her feet. He threw himself from Dusty, running into the shallow but swift-moving water. His boots sank into the mud, his hands stinging as he grabbed at the rocks, trying to find a stable footing. The girl's small arms flailed, her eyes wide with fear, and Luke could see the terror in her face. She did not speak English, but he understood her fear. "Don't worry." "I've got you," Luke said, moving closer. He reached out, and his hand found hers just as the water threatened to pull her under again. He pulled with all his strength, using the rocks for leverage, and finally managed to drag her to a safer spot on the creek's edge. Both of them collapsed on the warm sand, gasping for breath. Luke's chest heaved, but he couldn't help looking at her. She had dark hair tangled with mud and leaves, and her eyes were wide and shining with fear and relief. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You're safe." The girl's lips trembled, and she tried to speak, but the words were in a language Luke did not understand. She pointed toward the hills in the distance and then back at herself, gesturing as if to explain where she had come from. Luke shook his head. "I don't understand," he said softly, giving her a reassuring smile. He realized she might be alone or worse, lost from her family. He helped her to her feet and noticed that her clothes were torn and she had small cuts on her arms and legs. Without thinking twice, Luke pulled off his own jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked at him with gratitude, her fear slowly fading. Luke felt a strange warmth in his chest, a connection he could not explain. He had saved many animals, helped neighbors, and even broken up fights in town. But there was something about this small girl that made him feel a deeper sense of responsibility. Luke guided her to a nearby grove of mesquite trees, where the wind was calmer and the sun shone less harshly. He helped her sit down on a large rock while he searched his saddlebags for water and food. He found a canteen and some jerky, offering them to her. She hesitated, unsure, but finally took a sip and a small piece of the jerky, her hands trembling. Luke smiled encouragingly. "You're brave," he said. "You did well to stay on your feet." The girl nodded, her eyes still wary but softening. She spoke a few words in her language, and Luke shook his head again, regretting that he could not communicate more fully. But he knew she understood his kindness, and that was enough for now. Hours passed as Luke built a small fire, cooking some food he had brought along. The storm grew louder in the distance, with clouds rolling across the desert sky, but they were safe for the moment. Luke noticed that the girl was studying him carefully, as if trying to understand who he was. He could see her exhaustion, and he gestured for her to rest. She lowered her head and slowly closed her eyes. Luke kept watch, scanning the horizon and listening to the whispers of the desert. As evening fell, he realized they needed to find her family. He had heard stories of the Apache people living in the desert regions beyond the hills, tending their own lands and living according to traditions that had lasted for generations. He could guess that she belonged to one of these families. But the desert was vast and dangerous, and finding them would not be easy. The next morning, Luke carefully led the girl along the rocky paths, always staying alert. He carried her pack and guided Dusty, who had been tied to a nearby tree, keeping an eye out for any dangers. Slowly, he taught her a few English words, and she responded with a smile, pointing to herself and saying her name, Yana. Luke repeated it, smiling. Yana, he said. When they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley, Luke spotted smoke rising in the distance. He smiled, knowing it might be her family's home. He gestured to her, and her eyes lit up. She ran ahead, shouting words Luke could not understand. Moments later, a group of Apache people appeared, running to greet her. Luke hung back respectfully, allowing them their reunion. Yana's mother embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Though he did not understand their words, Luke could feel the gratitude and relief in their gestures. They turned to him, speaking rapidly, and he nodded, unsure of what to say. Yana's father approached, shaking Luke's hand firmly, a silent acknowledgement of the life he had saved. Before leaving, Yana ran back to Luke, hugging him tightly. He felt the warmth of her small arms and smiled, feeling a bond that would last far beyond that day. He watched as she returned to her family, safe at last. Luke felt a mix of satisfaction and something he couldn't name, a sense that his life had changed in a subtle, important way. As he rode back to Tombstone, the desert stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. He thought about Ayana and how fragile life could be, but also how powerful courage and kindness were. Little did he know, this small act of bravery and compassion would be remembered for years, shaping the lives of both him and the girl he had saved. Years passed after Luke McAllister had rescued Ayana from the rushing creek, but neither of them could forget that day. Life moved on, as it always does, carrying both of them in different directions. For Luke, the years were filled with work, the constant demands of running a ranch, and the slow rhythm of life in Tombstone. He became a respected man in the town, known not only for his courage, but also for his fairness and honesty. People came to him for advice, for help with cattle, or to seek his protection in a land that was often harsh and unforgiving. Yet despite the steady routine, a quiet part of Luke's heart always wandered back to that day in the desert. He remembered the fear in Ayana's eyes, the small hand that had trusted him completely, and the warmth that had stirred unexpectedly in his chest as he pulled her to safety. Luke tried to push the memory aside. He told himself it was just one act of kindness, one small event in a life full of other responsibilities. But whenever he rode out to check the fences, or when the wind whispered through the desert grass, he thought of her. He wondered where she had gone, what had become of her, and whether she remembered him at all. Sometimes, late at night, he would stare at the stars and imagine her smiling, running safely toward her family, her dark hair shining in the sunlight. It was a gentle, bittersweet thought, one that filled him with both warmth and longing. Meanwhile, far from the town and the dusty trails Luke knew so well, Ayana was growing up in her own world. The memory of the cowboy who had saved her life never left her mind. She carried it like a secret treasure, a quiet knowledge that someone had believed in her, had risked everything to keep her alive. Her family had returned to their village safely that day, and life continued as it always did, filled with work, learning, and the rhythms of her people. Ayana learned how to gather herbs, ride horses, and move through the desert with the skill and grace of her ancestors. She also learned the hardships of life in a changing world. Yet, in the midst of her daily routines, the memory of Luke remained vivid. She remembered the strong hands that had lifted her from the rushing water, the kind voice that reassured her even when she could not understand the words, and the courage that shone in his eyes. It was the first time she had felt safety in a dangerous world, and the feeling stayed with her as she grew. Sometimes, when she sat quietly under the wide blue sky, she would imagine him riding toward her, his horse kicking up dust, and she would smile. She did not know if she would ever see him again, but she carried the hope quietly in her heart. As the years passed, Ayana became known in her village for her intelligence, her bravery, and her kind heart. She helped her family with daily chores, taught younger children to read and write, and learned the stories of her people. At night, she would sit by the fire and listen to the elders speak of the desert, of survival, and of courage. In those stories, she saw reflections of the man who had saved her life, someone who faced danger without fear, who acted out of kindness, and who left a mark on the world without expecting anything in return. Despite the distance, fate seemed to keep the memory of their encounter alive. Yana learned English slowly, through books she borrowed and through travelers who came to her village. She often imagined what she would say if she could meet Luke again. She wanted to tell him how much that single act had meant to her, how it had shaped her life, and how she had dreamed of meeting him once more. Every step she took, every choice she made, carried a quiet reverence for the memory of the cowboy who had risked everything to save her. Luke, meanwhile, continued his life in Tombstone. He took pride in his work, but he also noticed the subtle changes in himself as the years went by. He would sometimes pause during his rides and watch the sun dip below the hills, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. He helped neighbors in times of need, shared his wisdom with younger cowboys, and occasionally rode to the outskirts of the desert, hoping to glimpse something familiar in the distance. Each time he looked across the horizon, he thought of the girl with dark hair and bright eyes, and a sense of longing rose in him that he could not explain. Life brought both joys and challenges. Luke faced harsh weather, a particularly difficult year of drought, and disputes over land and water that tested his patience. Yet he met each challenge with calm determination, earning the respect of the townspeople. He also found companionship in his friends and fellow cowboys, sharing stories around the fire and riding together through the open plains. Still, there was a quiet space in his heart reserved for a memory that refused to fade. One spring, a traveling trader came to Tombstone, bringing news of distant villages and communities. Luke listened with interest, particularly when the trader spoke of the Apache villages beyond the hills. Something in his chest stirred, a small hope that perhaps Ayana was alive and thriving, and that life had treated her kindly. He asked questions, careful not to reveal too much curiosity, and learned that many of the villages were still maintaining their traditions despite the encroaching changes in the surrounding lands. He smiled quietly to himself, imagining her among them, growing strong and brave just as he remembered. Meanwhile, Ayana's life continued to flourish. She became skilled in both the traditional ways of her people and the modern knowledge she learned from books and travelers. She cared for her family, taught younger children, and began to explore the lands around her village with confidence and curiosity. But no matter how far she roamed, the memory of Luke lingered like a gentle shadow, guiding her choices and inspiring her courage. She began to dream more vividly of a reunion, imagining what it would feel like to see him again, to speak to him, and to share with him the life she had built. One day, as Ayana helped her mother gather herbs near the edge of the desert, she felt a strange stirring in her heart. It was a feeling she could not explain, a pull, a whisper, a sense that something from the past was calling her. She paused, looking toward the distant hills where she had first been rescued years ago, and a determined resolve grew within her. She decided that one day she would return to the town where the cowboy lived, not just to see him, but to express the gratitude and admiration she had carried in her heart all these years. The thought both excited and terrified her, but she knew she had to try. Back in Tombstone, Luke continued to live his life quietly. He maintained the ranch, helped the town, and watched the seasons change with the patience of a man who knew the value of hard work. But the memory of the girl he had saved remained a quiet part of him, a memory that sometimes appeared in dreams or in moments when the desert seemed especially beautiful and dangerous all at once. He could not forget her because, in a way, she represented something he had never found elsewhere, a pure, unspoken connection born of courage and trust. Over the years, both Luke and Ayana changed. Luke became more thoughtful, more introspective, and more aware of the subtle beauty in life. Ayana grew strong, capable, and wise beyond her years. Yet despite the years apart, their bond remained alive in their hearts, a silent promise of something greater. Each of them carried the memory of that day, and though life had taken them in different directions, The threads of fate quietly wove their lives together in anticipation of a reunion neither could yet imagine. Even as Luke repaired fences and guided cattle, and Ayanna tended to her family and learned the ways of her people, both of them felt a quiet anticipation, though they could not name it. In the deep recesses of their hearts, they both knew that the past had left a mark that would not fade, that one day, the boy who had saved the girl and the girl who had been saved would meet again. The desert, wide and wild, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for that moment. And so life continued, filled with work, challenges, and quiet joys, yet the memory of a single courageous act, a single moment of trust and bravery continued to shape their worlds. Each day brought new experiences, new lessons, and new opportunities for growth, yet the bond between Luke and Ayanna, though unseen, remained unbroken. It was a bond of fate, courage, and the quiet power of human connection, patiently waiting for the day when their paths would cross once more. Years had passed since Luke McAllister had rescued Ayanna from the rushing creek, but the memory of her never left him. He worked diligently on his ranch, rising with the sun and tending to cattle, repairing fences, and helping neighbors in Tombstone. Life was steady and predictable, yet every now and then when he rode through the open desert, he felt a tug at his heart, a quiet memory of a small, brave girl with dark hair and bright, trusting eyes. He did not know if he would ever see her again, but the memory lingered, warm and insistent, like the desert wind itself. Meanwhile, Ayanna had grown into a remarkable young woman. Years of learning, courage, and survival had shaped her into someone strong, kind, and wise. She remembered the day Luke had saved her vividly, the cold rush of water, the fear, the hands that had pulled her to safety, and the gentle words that had calmed her. That memory had stayed with her through every challenge, inspiring her courage and determination. She had learned English over the years, reading books brought by travelers and practicing patiently, so that one day, if she could find him, she could tell him everything she had never been able to say. Ayanna had often imagined returning to the town where Luke lived, but the vastness of the desert and the uncertainty of life had held her back. She knew the journey would be long and dangerous, and there was always the possibility that he might not even remember her. But the thought of finally seeing him again, of expressing her gratitude and perhaps something more, grew stronger with each passing year. Finally, one crisp morning, she made up her mind. She would return to Tombstone, to the man who had changed her life with a single act of bravery. Her journey began at dawn. Ayanna packed a small bag with essentials, water, food, a few personal belongings, and a small gift she had crafted herself. She wore sturdy boots and her hair was tied back neatly, prepared for the long ride across the desert. The sun rose, casting golden light across the land, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She knew that the journey would test her strength, but she also felt a deep certainty in her heart that this was the right path. Days passed as Ayanna traveled through the desert. She rode carefully, choosing paths that were safe but also efficient, navigating the rocky terrain with skill. She encountered small challenges along the way, unexpected rain showers, difficult passes, and wild animals. But she faced them with courage, remembering the lessons of her childhood and the memory of the cowboy who had saved her. Each night she camped under the stars, listening to the desert wind and imagining what it would be like to see Luke again. Her heart beat faster with each thought, a mixture of hope, fear, and anticipation. Back in Tombstone, Luke's life had continued much as before. He spent his days tending the ranch and helping neighbors, and his evenings riding through the desert trails. One evening, as he returned from checking the farthest fence line, he noticed something unusual, a small figure on the horizon, moving steadily toward the town. At first, he thought it might be a traveler or a trader, but as the figure drew closer, something about her stance, her confidence, and the determined way she rode felt familiar. His heart quickened. Ayanna had reached the outskirts of Tombstone. She had seen the town from a distance and felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. She adjusted her pack and took a deep breath, preparing herself for the moment she had dreamed of for so long. Every step, every mile had led her here. She approached cautiously, wanting to make a good impression, but unable to hide the excitement that surged through her. She had grown into a strong, capable woman, but inside, a small part of her was still the frightened girl who had once been saved. When Luke saw her ride into the town, he froze. Time seemed to stand still. The girl he had saved was no longer a child, but a confident, beautiful young woman. Her eyes, dark, bright, and full of life, met his, and for a moment neither spoke. The crowd in the town began to notice, murmuring among themselves, curious about the stranger. But Luke's focus was entirely on her. He could not believe it. Could it really be her? The same girl from the creek so many years ago, standing before him, alive and grown into someone he barely recognized, but somehow felt he had always known. Iana dismounted carefully, her movements calm but deliberate. She approached him with a warm smile, her eyes never leaving his. "Luke," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nervous excitement she felt. "It's me, Iana. Do you remember me? I'm the girl you saved years ago." Luke's eyes widened and his throat tightened. Words failed him at first. He nodded slowly, feeling emotions he had tried to push aside for so long. "Iana, is it really you?" he asked finally, his voice filled with disbelief and joy. She nodded, her smile widening. "Yes, it's me. I've come back to thank you and to see you again." Her voice was soft but filled with sincerity. Luke could see the courage in her eyes, the same courage she had shown as a child, now grown into a quiet strength that radiated from her. The town watched in awe as the reunion unfolded. There was something almost magical about the way they stood together, connected by a memory so deep and powerful that it had lasted across years and distance. Luke reached out, gently taking her hand. The warmth of her touch, the familiarity of her presence, and the realization that she had come all this way filled him with a profound sense of happiness and gratitude. Iana and Luke spent the next few hours walking through the town, talking, laughing, and sharing stories of the years they had spent apart. She told him about her life in the village, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. He shared his own experiences, the quiet moments on the ranch, and the ways life had changed in Tombstone. Each story brought them closer, revealing not only the experiences they had lived, but the emotions, hopes, and dreams that had shaped them. Despite the years apart, the connection between them was unmistakable. They understood each other in a way that words alone could not convey, a bond forged in a moment of courage, trust, and mutual respect. Luke realized that the memory he had cherished for so long was not just a fleeting moment of the past. It was a living, breathing connection that had grown stronger over the years. Iana, too, felt the same. The journey she had undertaken was not just a physical one across the desert, but a journey of the heart, bringing her back to the man who had changed her life forever. As evening fell, Luke invited Iana to the ranch. She accepted, eager to see the place that had shaped so many of his years. They rode together, Dusty and Iana's horse moving side by side, the golden light of sunset painting the desert in hues of orange and pink. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of two people who had shared a moment that would never be forgotten. At the ranch, Luke showed her around, the stables, the fields, and the small cabin where he kept his tools and memories. Iana listened attentively, asking questions and commenting on the beauty of the land. She felt a sense of belonging she had never expected, as if returning here had completed a circle that had begun years ago in the rushing waters of the creek. Luke felt the same way. Seeing her here, alive and confident, made him realize how deeply that single act of bravery had influenced both their lives. As the night fell, they sat by the fire outside the cabin. The stars shone brightly above, and the quiet desert seemed to hold its breath, as if witnessing a moment of fate fulfilled. Iana looked at Luke, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the emotions she had carried for so long. "Luke," she said softly, "I have something to tell you, something I've carried in my heart all these years. I've returned not just to thank you, but because I care for you. I want to be by your side if you will have me." Luke felt a wave of emotion sweep over him. He had never expected this moment, yet he realized that he had always hoped for it, even without knowing it. He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes, seeing the courage, sincerity, and love reflected there. "Iana," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, I've never stopped thinking of you. You've changed my life in ways I cannot even describe. I would be honored to have you by my side." The desert night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, and in that quiet moment, both of them felt a sense of peace, fulfillment, and happiness. The years of separation, the challenges they had faced, and the journeys they had undertaken had all led to this reunion. They knew that life would continue to bring trials and changes, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough. And so, under the endless stars of the desert sky, Luke and Ayanna sat together, hands intertwined, hearts connected, and a shared memory of courage and trust blossoming into something deeper. A love that had been years in the making, now finally finding its place in the world. The desert was quiet that morning, the sun rising slowly over the distant hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. Luke McAllister and Ayanna stood together outside the ranch cabin, watching the sunlight spill across the fields. The air smelled of warm earth, dry grass, and the faint scent of sage drifting in the wind. It was peaceful, but it was also full of promise. After years of longing, worry, and separation, they were finally together. The world seemed brighter somehow, as if everything they had endured had been leading to this very moment. The days that followed were filled with simple joys and quiet discoveries. Luke showed Ayanna the ranch in detail, how to check the fences, feed the cattle, and care for the horses. She listened attentively, learning quickly, her curiosity and intelligence shining through. Luke found himself amazed at how capable she was, how confident and thoughtful. She moved with ease among the animals, speaking softly to them, tending to each task with care. He realized that she had grown into a strong, remarkable woman, someone who could handle the hardships of life with grace and courage, just as he had always imagined she would. Ayanna, for her part, was equally fascinated by the life Luke had built. She admired the way he cared for his land, how he treated each animal with respect, and how he had built a small, steady world in the midst of the wild desert. She asked questions about the ranch's history, the people in town, and the challenges he had faced over the years. Luke answered patiently, telling her stories of neighbors who had helped him, cattle drives that had gone wrong, and moments of quiet triumph in his work. She listened, laughing at his lighter stories and growing thoughtful at the more serious ones. Each conversation brought them closer, a reminder of the bond they had formed so many years ago in a far different and more dangerous time. One afternoon, as they rode together along a narrow desert trail, Ayanna spoke of her life since they had last met. She told Luke about her family, her learning, and the many times she had thought of him while navigating the challenges of growing up. Luke listened with awe and admiration. He had known she would be strong, but hearing about her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering spirit filled him with pride and deep affection. He realized that the girl he had saved had grown into someone extraordinary, someone whose presence made the world feel richer, brighter, and more meaningful. They returned to the ranch as the sun began to dip behind the hills. The golden light bathed the fields and the cabin, giving the land a warm, magical glow. Luke and Ayanna dismounted and walked together toward the small fire pit near the cabin. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the soft sounds of the desert, the distant cry of a hawk, the rustling of the wind through the grass, and the occasional neigh of a horse. They sat together, hands brushing occasionally, sharing smiles and glances that spoke volumes without a single word. "I can't believe we're finally here," Ayanna said softly, her voice full of wonder. "All these years I dreamed of this moment, and now it's real." Luke smiled, taking her hand in his. "I know. I've thought about it every year, every day. I never imagined it could really happen, but now that it has, it feels right. It feels like it was meant to be." They spent the evening talking under the stars, sharing memories and dreams. Ayanna told Luke about her hopes for the future, the kind of life she wanted to build, and the ways she wanted to honor her family and her heritage. Luke shared his own dreams, hopes for the ranch, and the life he imagined with her by his side. As the fire crackled and the desert night wrapped around them, they felt a sense of completeness, a quiet certainty that their lives were now intertwined in ways that nothing could break. The next morning, Luke introduced Ayanna to the townspeople. They were initially curious, then pleasantly surprised as they saw the connection between the two. The town had known Luke for years, but they had not known the story of the girl he had saved so long ago. Seeing them together, hand in hand, and witnessing the bond that was still as strong as ever, inspired admiration and respect. The townspeople offered their congratulations, gifts, and support, celebrating not just the reunion of two people but the story of courage, trust, and love that had brought them together. Ayanna also visited her family's village to share the news. Her parents were overjoyed to learn that she had found Luke and that they had reunited. They welcomed him with warmth and respect, acknowledging the courage he had shown years ago and the deep affection that now united their daughter with him. It was a blending of families, traditions, and histories, an affirmation that love could bridge worlds and connect hearts across distances and time. Life together settled into a rhythm that was both new and familiar. Luke and Ayana worked side by side on the ranch, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and managing the land. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet evenings under the stars. They faced challenges together, from unexpected storms to the daily demands of ranch life. But they did so as partners, supporting each other, learning from each other, and growing stronger together. Each obstacle was no longer a burden but an opportunity to deepen their trust and reliance on one another. As the months passed, their love continued to grow. They celebrated small victories, successful cattle drives, bountiful harvests, and joyful town gatherings. They also found time for quiet, personal moments, riding along the desert trails, sitting by the river, and sharing stories of their pasts. Every day, they discovered something new about each other, a habit, a smile, a story that made their connection richer and more profound. One day, as they watched the sun set over the distant hills, Ayana turned to Luke with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember the day you saved me?" she asked. Luke nodded, his eyes distant for a moment, recalling the rushing creek, the fear, and the hands that had reached for hers. "Of course I remember," he said softly. "I think about it often. It's a memory that changed my life." Ayana smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "It changed mine too. It showed me that kindness and courage can come when you least expect it, and it led me here to you." Luke wrapped his arm around her, feeling the warmth and certainty of their bond. "I'm grateful for that day," he said, "and for you. Every day with you makes me realize how lucky I am." Their lives continued, filled with the steady rhythm of love, work, and shared experiences. They blended their worlds, Luke's knowledge of the desert and ranching with Ayana's wisdom, traditions, and unique perspective. Together, they taught each other, grew together, and built a life that was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than either could have imagined alone. The years passed, but the memory of the day Luke saved Ayana remained a sacred part of their story. They often revisited the creek where it had happened, walking hand in hand, speaking softly of that moment and how it had shaped everything that followed. The place that had once been dangerous and frightening had become a symbol of courage, trust, and the power of human connection. Neighbors and friends in the town often spoke of the couple with admiration. Luke and Ayana were seen as a living example of how courage, kindness, and love could bridge gaps, overcome challenges, and create something beautiful. They inspired others not with grand gestures, but with quiet integrity, patience, and the deep respect they showed one another every day. On the ranch, life remained full of work and purpose. Yet it was also full of laughter, quiet conversations, and the joy of shared accomplishments. Ayana introduced new ways of caring for the animals, improving the crops, and managing the land, blending her knowledge with Luke's experience. Together, they solved problems, celebrated successes, and faced difficulties with courage and determination. Their partnership was not only a union of hearts, but of minds and spirits, each complementing the other, creating harmony and balance. As the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows across the fields, Luke and Ayana stood together on a small hill overlooking their land. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of the earth and the memory of the past. They looked at each other, eyes shining with love, gratitude, and the unspoken understanding that they had found something rare and precious, a bond that had begun with a single act of courage and had grown into a lifetime of shared experiences, joy, and love. "I can't imagine life without you," Ayana said softly. Luke smiled, holding her close. "Neither can I. You've made every day brighter, every challenge easier, and every moment better. I'm grateful for you, for everything you've brought into my life." And so, under the vast desert sky, they embraced their future together, carrying the lessons of the past, the strength of their bond, and the promise of many years filled with love, courage, and shared adventure. The story that had begun with a rushing creek, fear, and a simple act of bravery had grown into something enduring and beautiful. A life built together, a love remembered and cherished, and a partnership that would last a lifetime. In the quiet of the desert, the ranch, and the town, Luke and Ayana's story became a part of the land itself. It was a story of courage, hope, and the power of human connection, a reminder that one small act of kindness can change lives forever, And that love, when nurtured, can bridge any distance, overcome any challenge, and endure across the years.